It gets hot and it gets dry during the summer months. That's really nothing new here in the Northwest. But this summer has seen several stretches of very high temperatures with very little precipitation. What impact is that having on area potato growers? Joining us on the PNW Ag Network hotline is Chris Voigt, Executive Director of the Washington State Potato Commission. And Chris, how is the summer treating growers, and how's that 2024 crop looking?
Well, it's a good question. I think that we're in the midst of trying to figure that out. The season actually started off incredible. Just perfect growing weather through, April, May, June. And then once we hit July, we got some of those higher temperatures. Now, it's not unusual for potato plants to endure high temperatures, but we had some extended periods of heat. And generally speaking, potatoes aren't too fond of that because really the plant really shuts down once it hits about 94 degrees. And so every time the temperature's above 94 degrees, that plant really isn't growing anymore. And so there's some concerns about what might happen to the yields for our later season crop. But our early potatoes, the ones that we're harvesting now and started digging in the middle of July are fabulous. Incredible quality, really strong yields. But those were the potatoes that really took advantage of those excellent excellent growing conditions early on in the season. So far, early stuff looks really good. If you drive around the countryside, the plants actually look pretty healthy for this time of year, even though we have had some high heat. But we really won't know until, September when we start harvesting those late season varieties. And those are the potatoes that go into storage. They make up the bulk of our crop. And then we'll have a better idea of how it looks.
Chris, have you heard anything from growers about smoke being an issue? Because I know we don't have as many wildfires burning across Washington as we do across Oregon, but it's still pretty smoky in a lot of communities. Has that been an issue this year?
Not like it has in the past. And actually, smoke is kind of sometimes a mixed blessing. Depending on when the smoke comes, like, for example, I think it was maybe 5 years ago or so, we had pretty severe smoke, a lot of it blown in from Canada, and there was a lot of concern about, the smoke just kind of blocking out the sun and, losing the photosynthesis in the plant. But actually what we experienced 5 years ago was actually a cooling effect during really high temperatures, and that actually boosted yields. And so sometimes the heat or sometimes the smoke can reduce yields, and actually sometimes it can provide a cooling effect and actually increase yields. So it's really kind of a mixed bag of smoke. But this year, the smoke hasn't been much of a factor either way.
Chris, let's transition a little bit. Let's talk about trade. Obviously, trade is so important for potato growers across Washington. How has the trade picture looked, and how have those markets been for those growers?
Well, I was anticipating you were going to ask that question, and so I dug back and looking at some data, did a little bit of research, and here's some figures I want to share with you, Glenn. In the last 10 years, potato exports, primarily frozen potato products like French fries, hash brown patties, tater tots, that type of thing, are up 24%, right? That's great news, a 24% growth in the last 10 years. But here's a statistic that I'm going to share with you that's concerning. Over those same 10 years, even though our exports were up 24%, we lost global market share. It went from 37% down to 21%. So that just shows that, demand for frozen potato products is high, and we haven't been able to keep up with demand. And so other countries have stepped up. The European Union, China has gotten big into frozen potatoes. India is now starting to export. Argentina is now exporting. So we're starting to see a lot of new players, new competition in the marketplace. And what's really making it a struggle in this past couple of years, a few things going on. One is the strength of the dollar. Anytime the dollar is strong, that puts us at a trade disadvantage because it makes our products more expensive. Another contributing factor to sluggish exports right now are the lack of free trade agreements. The U.S., the last two administrations have just not been interested in trade agreements. And so we have seen our competition step up, and they're signing free trade agreements with our customers. and we're losing market share. I remember going to Vietnam 6 years ago and looking in the warehouses there 8 years ago, and the warehouses were full of Washington State frozen French fries. I go there now, or went there last year, and it's all European Union. Again, because the EU has a free trade agreement with Vietnam, the U.S. doesn't. So, it's starting to become concerning that we've just really fallen behind in our ability to do a substantial amount of exports. I mean, the exports are still important to us, still represent a lot of business, but we're just not being able to keep up with demand because we're just not investing the right type of political capital in getting free trade agreements done, and working with other governments on getting our products into their countries.
Chris, in your assessment, is there just not an appetite anymore in D.C. to go the trade route, or has it just been the last two administrations, it just hasn't been a priority?
I think that the last two administrations have really focused internally. Have really kind of put America first. I think that is kind of a common theme out there, and we're just not seeing the presence of the U.S. in a lot of foreign markets anymore, particularly the Pacific Rim, Southeast Asia. The U.S. used to have a strong just geopolitical presence, but now that we've dropped out of trade, really, or cut back on trade with a lot of those countries in Southeast Asia, you're starting to see China become a stronger economic force and a stronger partner with these countries in Southeast Asia. So, I think that, trade is not just an economic issue, it's really a geopolitical issue too. If we want the U.S. to have strong relationships throughout the world, then it's important that we have strong trade relationships, because that's really the fundamental building block with relationships in countries is economic and trade. And once you have that, then you can have a strong geopolitical force in that area. So I'm hoping that, with the new election that's coming up, that, our incoming administration, whoever it may be, will kind of re-examine our status in the world and put trade at the forefront of it again, so that we can expand economically, but then also that we can have a stronger geopolitical presence in some of these areas that are critical for national security.
Chris Voigt, Executive Director of the Washington State Potato Commission. Thanks for joining us right here on the PNW Ag Network. And by the way, I forgot to mention today is National Potato Day, so happy Potato Day.